The rain hammered against the cracked windows of the abandoned warehouse, each drop echoing through the empty halls like gunshots. General Marcus Stone pulled his military coat tighter as he stepped through the debris-scattered entrance, his weathered boots crunching on broken glass. The anonymous tip had led him here, to this forgotten corner of the city where hope seemed to have died long ago. For 3 months, he had searched every corner of the country. 3 months since his daughter Sarah had vanished without a trace from her university campus. The police had given up after 6 weeks, filing her case away with the thousands of other missing persons who simply disappeared into the void. But Marcus Stone was not a man who accepted defeat easily. 25 years of military service had taught him that surrender was never an option. The warehouse stretched before him like a maze of shadows and rust. Old machinery sat covered in dust sheets, their shapes looming in the dim light filtering through the broken roof. Marcus moved carefully, his hand instinctively reaching for the service weapon at his hip. Something felt wrong about this place, something that made his soldier's instincts scream warnings. As he ventured deeper into the building, a faint sound reached his ears. It was barely audible over the rain, but his trained hearing caught it immediately. Whimpering, soft, broken sounds that made his heart clench with a terrible recognition. He had heard similar sounds before in war zones and refugee camps, the cries of people who had endured more than the human spirit should bear. Following the sound, Marcus climbed a rusted staircase that groaned under his weight. Each step brought the sounds closer, mixed now with what sounded like muffled voices. His military training kicked in, and he moved with the silent precision of a man who had spent decades navigating dangerous territory. On the second floor, he found a corridor lined with doors. Most hung open, revealing empty rooms filled with nothing but shadows and neglect. But one door was different. It was newer than the others, reinforced with metal bars and multiple locks. The sounds were coming from behind it. Marcus approached with caution, pressing his ear to the cold metal. The voices were clearer now, rough and cruel, speaking in hushed tones about schedules and payments. His blood ran cold as the pieces began falling into place. This was not just an abandoned warehouse. It was something far more sinister. The lock-picking skills he had learned in special operations came back to him as if no time had passed. Within minutes, he had worked through the first 2 locks, his hands steady despite the rage building in his chest. As he worked on the 3rd lock, he heard footsteps approaching from the far end of the corridor. Quickly, he pressed himself against the wall beside the door, drawing his weapon. 2 men appeared, talking casually about their evening plans, completely unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. Marcus waited until they were close enough, then moved with lightning speed. Years of combat experience made the confrontation brief and silent. With the guards neutralized, Marcus returned to the locks. His hands shook slightly as he worked on the final mechanism, not from fear, but from the overwhelming possibility of what he might find behind this door. The lock clicked open, and he slowly pushed the door inward. The sight that greeted him would haunt him for the rest of his life. The room was larger than he had expected, lined with makeshift cells constructed from chain-link fencing. In each cell, figures huddled in the darkness, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow with despair. Some were young women barely out of their teens, others appeared to be children. Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. These were victims of human trafficking, people who had been stolen from their lives and trapped in this nightmare. His training told him to secure the area and call for backup. But his father's heart drove him forward into the room. He moved from cell to cell, speaking softly to the terrified occupants, assuring them that help had arrived. Many cowered away from him, too traumatized to trust anyone in authority. Others stared at him with eyes that had seen too much, their spirits broken by weeks or months of captivity. It was in the 3rd cell that he saw her. Huddled in the corner, her once bright blonde hair now matted and dirty, was a figure that made his breath catch in his throat. The clothes were different, torn and stained, but the shape of her shoulders, the way she held her head, was achingly familiar. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his own heartbeat. The figure looked up slowly, and Marcus felt his knees nearly buckle. It was her, but not the vibrant young woman who had hugged him goodbye 3 months ago. This version of his daughter was a shadow, her face pale and thin, her eyes holding a depth of pain that no 20-year-old should ever know. But it was the bruises that stopped his heart. Purple and yellow marks covered her visible skin, some fresh, others fading to sickly green. Her lip was split, and there was a cut above her left eyebrow that had healed poorly. The sight of her injuries ignited a fury in Marcus that threatened to consume his sanity. "Dad?" Sarah's voice was a broken whisper, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. "Are you real?" Marcus felt tears he hadn't shed since his wife's funeral begin to blur his vision. His daughter, his precious girl, was alive. Broken, wounded, but alive. The relief was so overwhelming that he had to grip the fence to keep from falling. "I'm here, baby," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "Daddy's here and I'm going to get you out." As he fumbled with the lock on her cell, Marcus realized that finding Sarah was only the beginning. Getting her out safely, helping her heal from whatever horror she had endured, and bringing justice to those responsible would be the real battle. But for now, in this moment, nothing else mattered except the fact that his daughter was alive. The lock on Sarah's cell clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through Marcus's soul. His daughter flinched at the noise, pressing herself further into the corner, as if expecting punishment for his presence. The sight of her fear cut through him like a blade, but he forced himself to move slowly, keeping his voice gentle despite the rage burning in his chest. "Sarah, sweetheart, it's okay. I'm going to get you out of here," he said, pulling the cell door open carefully. The metal hinges creaked, and several other captives turned to watch with hollow, hopeless eyes. Sarah stared at him with confusion and disbelief. Her once bright blue eyes, so much like her mother's, were now clouded with trauma and exhaustion. She wore torn jeans and a dirty sweater that hung loose on her diminished frame. Marcus could see she had lost significant weight, her cheekbones more pronounced than they should be. "You can't be here," she whispered, shaking her head frantically. "They'll hurt you too. They'll kill you if they find you here." Marcus knelt down just outside the cell, making himself smaller and less threatening. "Nobody's going to hurt anyone anymore, baby. I promise you that." "Can you walk?" Sarah nodded slowly, though she struggled to stand. Marcus noticed how she favored her left leg, and the way she winced when putting weight on her right ankle. Every injury on her body was a crime he intended to answer for, but first, he needed to get her and the others to safety. "How many guards are there?" he asked quietly, helping Sarah step out of the cell. "Usually 4 at night," she replied, her voice stronger now, but still shaky. "2 downstairs, 2 up here, but sometimes more come." She paused, looking around at the other prisoners. "Dad, we can't leave them. Please, we can't leave them here." Marcus felt a surge of pride despite the circumstances. Even after everything she had endured, Sarah's first thought was for others. "We're not leaving anyone behind," he assured her. "But I need to know what we're dealing with. How long have you been here?" "I don't know exactly. Maybe 2 months. They took my phone, my watch. Days just blend together." Sarah's voice broke slightly. "They said no one was looking for me anymore. That everyone had given up." The lie made Marcus's jaw clench. "I never stopped looking. Not for 1 second." As they spoke, Marcus began checking the other cells. There were 12 prisoners in total, ranging in age from what looked like 14 to perhaps 30. Most were young women, but there were 2 boys who couldn't have been older than 16. All bore the signs of prolonged captivity and abuse. "Listen to me, everyone," Marcus addressed the group, his military command voice carrying clearly through the room. "My name is General Marcus Stone. I'm here to get you all out, but I need you to stay calm and follow my instructions exactly." A young woman in the corner cell spoke up, her accent suggesting she was from Eastern Europe. "You are police?" "Military," Marcus replied. "And I'm getting all of you home to your families." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "My family? They think I am dead. I have been here 8 months, 8 months. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. These monsters had been operating for at least that long, possibly longer. How many others had they taken? How many had they failed to save? Sarah grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Dad, there are more buildings. This isn't the only place. I heard them talking about shipments moving people to different locations." Marcus filed this information away for later. Right now, his priority was the immediate rescue. He quickly surveyed the room, noting the single exit and the lack of windows. The tactical situation was challenging but not impossible. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," he began, but was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs outside, heavy boots moving with purpose. "Hide," Sarah whispered urgently, pushing him toward a dark corner. "Please, they can't see you." But Marcus Stone had not spent 25 years in the military to hide from criminals. Instead, he positioned himself beside the door, his weapon ready. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by harsh voices. "Time for the evening check," one voice said. "Boss wants to make sure the new girl is settling in properly." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. New girl. They were still actively taking people, still destroying lives while he had been searching for Sarah. The door handle turned, and Marcus prepared to act. Two men entered the room, both large and armed. They wore expensive clothes but moved with the casual cruelty of predators who had grown comfortable with their power. The first man carried a tray of what looked like scraps of food, while the second held a metal baton that he tapped against his leg. "Well, well," the first man said, noticing the open cell door immediately. "Looks like someone's trying to be clever." He never saw Marcus coming. The general moved with the silent efficiency of a trained killer, striking the first man unconscious before he could react. The second man tried to raise his weapon, but Marcus was already on him, disarming him with a move that left the trafficker gasping on the floor. Within seconds, both threats were neutralized. Marcus quickly searched them, finding keys, cell phones, and wallets filled with cash. The amount of money they carried suggested this was indeed a profitable operation, which made him even more determined to shut it down completely. "Is that all of them up here?" he asked Sarah, who was staring at her father with a mixture of awe and concern. "For now," she replied, "but more will come if these two don't report in. They have schedules, protocols." Marcus checked the phones he had taken. Multiple missed calls and text messages indicated a larger organization with strict operational procedures. This wasn't just a local crime ring. It was part of something much bigger and more organized. "We need to move now," he said, addressing the group. "I'm going to get you all out of here, but you need to stay together and stay quiet." "Can everyone walk?" Most nodded, though several of the prisoners were clearly weak from malnutrition and poor treatment. Marcus made quick mental calculations about the best route out of the building, accounting for the need to move slowly with injured and traumatized people. As he helped the Eastern European woman out of her cell, she grabbed his hand. "Thank you," she whispered in broken English. I thought no one would come." "Someone always comes," Marcus replied firmly. "You just have to survive long enough." Looking at his daughter, bruised and broken but still standing, still thinking of others before herself, Marcus knew that the rescue was only the beginning. These people would need medical attention, psychological support, and time to heal. But first, they needed to get out of this place of nightmares and back into the light. Marcus gathered the group of 12 rescued prisoners, his mind racing through escape protocols he had learned in countless military operations. The difference was that this time, his own daughter was among those he needed to protect. Sarah stayed, close to his side, her hand occasionally reaching out to touch his arm as if to confirm he was real. "Listen carefully," Marcus whispered to the group. "We're going to move together slowly and quietly. If I signal you to stop, you freeze immediately. If I signal you to run, you run, and don't look back. Understood?" Weak nods came from around the room. Marcus could see the fear in their eyes, but also something else: hope. For many of them, this was the first time in months they had seen any possibility of freedom. Before leading them out, Marcus quickly searched the unconscious guards more thoroughly. He found detailed schedules, radio equipment, and what appeared to be shipping manifests with dates and locations. His military mind automatically cataloged this intelligence for later use by law enforcement, but right now, survival was the priority. "Dad," Sarah whispered, pointing to a young boy who could barely stand. "Miguel hasn't eaten in 2 days. They were punishing him for trying to escape." Marcus looked at the boy, who couldn't have been more than 15. His dark eyes held a maturity that came from experiencing horrors no child should face. Without hesitation, Marcus scooped the boy up, carrying him despite his own advancing age. "What's your name, son?" Marcus asked, gently in Spanish, one of several languages he had picked up during his military career. "Miguel Rodriguez," the boy replied weakly. "I am from Guatemala. They took me from the bus station in Houston." Houston. That was over 300 miles away, which meant this trafficking network operated across state lines. Marcus filed this information away as they began moving toward the exit. The group moved through the warehouse like ghosts. their bare feet making almost no sound on the concrete floor. Marcus led them along a route that avoided the areas where he knew guards might be stationed. Sarah helped support an older woman, who had been limping, while the Eastern European woman, who had told them her name was Katya, helped keep the younger children calm. As they reached the stairwell, Marcus held up his hand for them to stop. Voices drifted up from below, casual conversation between the remaining guards. He counted at least 3 distinct voices, possibly 4. The rain outside had intensified, which would help mask any sounds they made, but would also make their escape more difficult. "There's a side exit," Sarah whispered in his ear. "Through the old loading dock. They don't guard it as heavily because the door is rusted shut from the outside." Marcus smiled grimly. A rusted door was nothing compared to the obstacles they had already overcome. He guided the group away from the main staircase toward the rear of the building. The loading dock area was darker and filled with old machinery, but it offered better concealment. The side door was indeed rusted, but Marcus's military training had taught him to be resourceful. Using a piece of metal pipe as a lever, he worked at the hinges while the others waited in tense silence. The sound of metal grinding against metal seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. "Someone's coming," Katya warned, her voice barely audible. Footsteps echoed through the warehouse, moving in their direction. Marcus abandoned his careful approach to the door and threw his full weight against it. The rusted hinges gave way with a screech that echoed through the building. "Go, go, go!" Marcus commanded, pushing the prisoners through the opening into the rain-soaked night. The fresh air hit them like a blessing after the stale atmosphere of their prison. Marcus could see several of the rescued victims breathing deeply, their faces turned up to the rain despite the cold. Freedom, even in a storm, was infinitely better than captivity and comfort. But their escape had been noticed. Shouts erupted from inside the warehouse, followed by the sound of running feet. Marcus knew they had minutes at most before armed pursuers would emerge. "This way," he directed, leading them away from the building toward a cluster of abandoned vehicles in the lot. His own car was parked several blocks away, too far to reach safely with this many people, especially in their weakened condition. Among the abandoned vehicles, Marcus found an old delivery truck with keys still in the ignition. The engine turned over after several attempts, coughing to life with a rough idle. It wasn't much, but it would get them away from immediate danger. "Everyone in the back," Marcus ordered, helping the weaker members of the group into the truck bed. Sarah climbed into the passenger seat beside him, her hand finding his arm again. "Dad, I was so scared I'd never see you again," she said, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "I know, baby. But you're safe now. You're all safe." Marcus put the truck in gear, just as the first armed figures appeared from the warehouse. Gunshots rang out behind them as Marcus floored the accelerator. The old truck lurched forward, its tires struggling for grip on the wet pavement. In the mirrors, Marcus could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, but they were already moving out of effective range. The truck's headlights cut through the rain as they drove through empty industrial streets. Marcus knew he needed to get to a police station or hospital, somewhere with security and medical facilities. But he also knew that the network they had, just escaped from, might have connections in law enforcement. Trust would have to be earned carefully. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, her voice stronger now that they were moving away from their captors. "Safe house first," Marcus replied. "I have contacts who can help us, people I trust completely." In the back of the truck, the rescued victims huddled together for warmth and comfort. Marcus could hear them talking quietly, sharing their stories, and beginning to process their newfound freedom. Some were crying, others laughing with hysteria and relief. Miguel, the young boy from Guatemala, had fallen asleep against Katya's shoulder. The woman stroked his hair gently while staring out at the passing city lights with wonder, as if seeing the world for the first time. "Dad," Sarah said quietly, "there are things I need to tell you. Things they did, things they made us do. I don't know if I can ever be the same person I was before." Marcus reached over and took her hand, careful of the bruises on her wrists. "You're my daughter, and I love you exactly as you are right now. We'll face whatever comes next together, okay? All of us will heal from this." As they drove through the night toward safety, Marcus began planning their next moves. The authorities would need to be notified, but carefully and through channels he trusted. The trafficking network would need to be dismantled completely. Most importantly, these 12 people would need extensive support to rebuild their lives. But for now, in this moment, they were free. The nightmare was ending, and despite everything they had endured, they had survived. Marcus looked at his daughter, broken but undefeated, and felt his heart swell with pride and determination. The real work of healing was just beginning. The safe house was a modest 2-story building in a quiet suburban neighborhood, indistinguishable from the homes around it. Marcus had purchased it years ago through a trust, one of several properties he maintained for emergencies. As they pulled into the garage, automatic doors closing behind them, he felt the first real moment of security since finding Sarah. "This is it," he announced to the group. "We're safe here." The rescued victims climbed out of the truck slowly, their movements careful and uncertain. Many had not been in a normal residential setting for months. The simple sight of a suburban garage with its everyday clutter of tools and storage boxes seemed to overwhelm some of them. Sarah stood beside the truck, swaying slightly on her feet. The adrenaline that had carried her through the escape was wearing off, leaving behind exhaustion and pain. Marcus wrapped his arm around her shoulders, feeling how thin she had become. "Let's get everyone inside and warm," he said, guiding the group through the door into the house. The interior was spartanly furnished but comfortable, with a large living room, fully equipped kitchen, and multiple bedrooms. Marcus had stocked it with emergency supplies including first aid equipment, clothing in various sizes, and non-perishable food. He had never imagined he would be using it to shelter trafficking victims, including his own daughter. "There are bathrooms upstairs and down," Marcus announced to the group. "Clean towels in all of them. There's clothing in the bedrooms if you want to change. Take whatever you need." Several of the younger victims immediately headed for the bathrooms, desperate to wash away the physical reminders of their captivity. Katya, the Eastern European woman, took charge of organizing the others, her natural leadership emerging now that immediate danger had passed. Marcus pulled Sarah aside into the kitchen. Under the bright lights, her injuries looked even worse than they had in the dim warehouse. The purple bruises covered her arms and neck, and he noticed a deep cut on her scalp that had been hidden by her matted hair. "Baby, we need to get you to a hospital," he said gently. Sarah shook her head immediately. "Not yet. Please, Dad, I can't handle strangers touching me right now. And we can't leave the others. They need us." Marcus understood. In the military, he had seen how trauma could make even medical treatment feel threatening. But looking at his daughter's injuries, he worried about internal damage that might not be immediately apparent. "Okay, but I'm calling Dr. Peterson. She's a friend, someone I trust completely. She can come here and check everyone out privately." Dr. Rebecca Peterson had served as a military physician during Marcus's last deployment. She now ran a private practice but had maintained her security clearance and could be trusted with sensitive situations. More importantly, she specialized in trauma medicine and had experience treating victims of violence. While Marcus made the call, Sarah wandered into the living room where the other survivors had gathered. Despite their own trauma, they were checking on each other, sharing quiet conversations and offering comfort. Miguel, the young boy from Guatemala, had found a blanket and was sharing it with 2 of the teenage girls. "My family," one of the girls was saying in heavily accented English. "They must think I am dead. I was supposed to call my mother every week." "We'll help you contact your families," Sarah assured her, though her own voice was shaky. "My father will help all of us." Marcus returned from his phone call to find Sarah sitting on the floor with the group, unconsciously taking on a leadership role despite her own condition. It reminded him so much of her mother, who had always put others' needs before her own. "Dr. Peterson is on her way," he announced. "She's bringing medical supplies and will check everyone out. She's also bringing some clothes and personal items." Over the next hour, Marcus watched as the rescued victims began to relax slightly in the safe environment. Hot showers, clean clothes, and warm food worked miracles for their morale. But he could see the deeper damage in their eyes, the way they startled at unexpected sounds and stayed close together for security. Sarah emerged from her shower wearing borrowed clothes that hung loose on her diminished frame. Her wet hair revealed the full extent of her scalp wound, and Marcus had to fight down a fresh wave of rage at what had been done to his child. "Dad, I need to tell you what happened," she said, settling beside him on the couch. "Not everything, not yet. But you need to know about the organization. It's bigger than just that warehouse. Sarah's voice was steady but quiet as she began to describe what she had learned during her captivity. The trafficking network operated across multiple states, with connections to legitimate businesses that provided cover. They moved victims regularly to prevent them from becoming familiar with any location. Most disturbing, they had contacts in law enforcement who provided warnings about investigations. They knew about police raids sometimes before they happened, Sarah explained. Someone was feeding them information. That's how they stayed ahead of everyone. Marcus felt his heart sink. Corruption in law enforcement would make it much more difficult to ensure the network was completely dismantled. It also meant that standard police channels might not be safe for reporting their discoveries. Dr. Peterson arrived 2 hours later, a tall woman with graying hair and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering in her medical career. She brought several large bags of supplies and immediately began setting up a makeshift medical station in one of the bedrooms. "Marcus," she said, embracing her old friend briefly. "I've treated combat trauma, but this is different. These people have been systematically brutalized. Can you help them?" Marcus asked. "Medically, yes. Most of their injuries will heal with time and proper care, but the psychological trauma will take much longer. They'll need specialized counseling, probably for years." Dr. Peterson began examining each victim privately, treating their injuries and documenting their conditions for eventual legal proceedings. When it was Sarah's turn, Marcus waited anxiously outside the room. "She's strong, Marcus," Dr. Peterson reported afterward. "Physically, she's malnourished and has some concerning bruises that suggest internal trauma, but nothing life-threatening. The head wound needs stitches, but it's healing well. Psychologically, that's going to be the real challenge." As the night progressed, Marcus began making secure phone calls to contacts he trusted completely. FBI agents who had worked with military intelligence, prosecutors who specialized in human trafficking cases, and victim advocates who could provide ongoing support. Each conversation had to be carefully managed to avoid alerting anyone who might be compromised. By dawn, a plan was beginning to take shape. The victims would remain in the safe house for several more days, while their stories were properly documented and their families contacted. The intelligence gathered from the warehouse would be turned over to a federal task force that operated independently of local law enforcement. Most importantly, each victim would receive comprehensive support for their recovery. Sarah found Marcus sitting on the porch as the sun rose, watching the quiet suburban street come to life. Normal people starting normal days, unaware of the horrors that existed in the shadows of their world. "I keep thinking about the others," Sarah said, settling beside him. "The ones who are still trapped in other places." "How many are there, Dad?" Marcus put his arm around his daughter, holding her close. "I don't know, baby, but we're going to find them. All of them. This doesn't end with us getting out." Looking at Sarah's bruised face in the morning light, Marcus made a silent promise. The network that had taken his daughter and these other innocent people would be completely destroyed. Every location would be found, every victim rescued, every perpetrator brought to justice. It would become his new mission, more important than any military operation he had ever undertaken. The general had found his daughter, but the war was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since the rescue, and the safe house had transformed into something resembling a temporary home. The rescued victims were slowly beginning to heal, both physically and emotionally, under Dr. Peterson's continued care and the support of specially trained counselors that Marcus had carefully vetted. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching Miguel and 2 of the younger girls playing a simple card game at the patio table. It was the first time she had seen any of them truly smile since their rescue. The sight filled her with a mixture of joy and sadness, knowing how long the road to full recovery would be for all of them. "The federal task force wants to meet with you again tomorrow," Marcus said, entering the kitchen with a secure phone in his hand. He had been coordinating with law enforcement agencies around the clock, sharing the intelligence they had gathered while ensuring the investigation remained secure from potentially corrupt contacts. "I know," Sarah replied, not turning from the window. "Agent Morrison seems nice enough, but talking about it brings everything back." Marcus set down the phone and joined her at the window. The bruises on Sarah's face had faded to yellow and green, and her physical injuries were healing well. But he could see the deeper wounds in her eyes, the way she startled at unexpected sounds and the nightmares that still woke her several times each night. "You don't have to do this alone," he reminded her gently. "I'll be there for every interview, every court appearance, everything." Sarah finally turned to look at him, and Marcus saw something new in her expression. Not just the trauma and pain that had defined her since the rescue, but also a growing determination that reminded him of her mother's fierce spirit. "Dad, I've been thinking about what comes next. After the interviews, after they catch these people, I can't just go back to college and pretend none of this happened." "You can take as much time as you need," Marcus assured her. "Your education will wait. Recovery is the priority." "That's not what I mean." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "I want to help. Other victims, other families going through what we went through. I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else." Marcus felt a surge of pride and concern. His daughter's instinct to help others was admirable, but he worried about her pushing herself too hard too soon. Dr. Peterson had warned him that trauma survivors sometimes threw themselves into activism as a way of avoiding their own healing process. Before he could respond, Katya appeared in the kitchen doorway. The Eastern European woman had become the unofficial leader among the survivors, organizing daily activities and providing emotional support to the younger victims. Her strength was remarkable considering what she had endured. "Marcus, there is a problem," Katya said, her English much improved after 3 weeks of constant practice. "Miguel had nightmare again last night, but this time he said names. Names of other children who were kept in different place." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. They had already provided law enforcement with dozens of names and locations mentioned by the survivors, but new information continued to emerge as their memories became clearer with healing. "Did he remember where?" Marcus asked. "He thinks maybe warehouse near the river. He heard boats, smelled fish. And there were other children there, some very young, maybe 8, 9 years old." The thought of children that young being held captive made Marcus's jaw clench. The investigation had already uncovered evidence of the trafficking network's massive scope, with connections to organized crime groups operating across multiple countries. But each new detail revealed additional horrors. "I'll call Agent Morrison immediately," Marcus said, reaching for the secure phone. "Dad, wait." Sarah's voice stopped him. "I want to talk to Miguel first. Sometimes the kids open up to me more than to the agents. They're scared of authority figures." Marcus hesitated. He understood Sarah's logic, but he also worried about her taking on too much responsibility for the other survivors' well-being. Dr. Peterson had warned that trauma bonding could be both helpful and potentially harmful if it prevented individual healing. 10 minutes, he agreed finally. "Then I'm calling it in." Sarah nodded and headed toward the patio where Miguel was now sitting alone, staring out at the small garden behind the house. The boy had been quiet and withdrawn since his rescue, speaking mainly in Spanish and only when directly asked questions. Through the window, Marcus watched his daughter approach Miguel with infinite patience and gentleness. She had developed an almost maternal instinct toward the younger survivors, something that both impressed and concerned him. At 20, she should be focusing on her own recovery, not shouldering responsibility for others. But as he watched Sarah coax more details from Miguel, Marcus realized that helping others might actually be part of her healing process. She was finding purpose in her pain, transforming her trauma into something that could protect other innocent people. The conversation between Sarah and Miguel lasted exactly 10 minutes. When they returned to the kitchen, the boy's eyes were red from crying, but he seemed relieved to have shared his burden. "There are definitely more children," Sarah reported. "Miguel says there were at least 6 kids under 12 in the Riverside location. They kept them separate from the older prisoners." Marcus felt sick thinking about children that young being subjected to such horror. He immediately called Agent Morrison, providing the new details and urging immediate action. The FBI had been working around the clock to dismantle the network, but their careful approach sometimes felt too slow when lives were at stake. "There's something else," Sarah added after Marcus ended the call. "Miguel says one of the guards mentioned moving operations because of increased law enforcement activity. They might be shutting down some locations and consolidating others." This was exactly what Marcus had feared. Criminal organizations often became more dangerous when they felt pressured, sometimes choosing to eliminate evidence rather than risk exposure. In this case, evidence meant human beings. "We need to get this information to the task force immediately," Marcus said, already dialing another number. Over the next several hours, the safe house became an impromptu command center. Federal agents arrived to conduct emergency interviews with Miguel and other survivors, who might have additional information about the Riverside location. Marcus coordinated with multiple agencies while trying to shield the victims from the chaos of the investigation. Dr. Peterson arrived in the afternoon to provide additional support for the survivors, who were clearly distressed by the renewed focus on their traumatic experiences. Some of the younger victims had regressed slightly, clinging to Katya and Sarah for comfort. "This is exactly what I was worried about," Dr. Peterson told Marcus privately. "These people need stability and routine to heal. Constantly reliving their trauma for investigators is counterproductive. But if we can save those children," Marcus began. "I understand the urgency," Dr. Peterson interrupted, "but you have to consider the well-being of the people you've already saved. They matter too." Marcus found himself caught between competing priorities. The military commander in him wanted to pursue every lead aggressively, to strike hard and fast before the network could relocate or eliminate evidence. But the father in him saw how the investigation was affecting Sarah and the other survivors, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. That evening, as the agents finally departed and the house settled into quiet, Sarah found Marcus sitting alone in his study, surrounded by files and photographs that represented the scope of the trafficking network they were fighting. "You look like you did during your deployment briefings," she observed, settling into the chair across from his desk. "This is more important than any mission I ever had in the military," Marcus replied, "and more complicated." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility her father was carrying. "Dad, I know you're trying to protect us while also saving the others. But you don't have to choose. We're stronger than you think, all of us." Looking at his daughter, Marcus saw not just the broken victim he had rescued 3 weeks ago, but also the strong, determined woman she was becoming. The trauma had changed her, yes, but it had also revealed a depth of character and compassion that amazed him. "Tomorrow we start Phase 2, Marcus decided. "We're going to help the task force find every location, rescue every victim, and dismantle this entire network. But we're going to do it smart without compromising anyone's recovery." Sarah smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Marcus had seen from her since the rescue. "We're going to win this, aren't we?" "Yes," Marcus replied with absolute certainty. "We're going to win." 6 months after the rescue, Marcus stood in a federal courtroom watching as the last of the trafficking network's leaders received their sentences. The judge's words carried the weight of justice long delayed. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Around him, families of victims wept with relief, while survivors like Sarah and Katya embraced with tears of triumph. The investigation had been even more extensive than Marcus had initially imagined. The network had operated across 7 states with connections to international crime syndicates. In total, law enforcement had rescued 143 victims and arrested 67 perpetrators. The Riverside warehouse that Miguel had remembered contained 11 children, the youngest only 7 years old. Sarah sat beside Marcus in the courtroom, no longer the broken young woman he had found in that warehouse cell. The physical scars had healed, leaving only faint marks that served as reminders of her strength rather than her suffering. More importantly, the psychological healing had progressed remarkably well with the help of specialized therapy and her work with other survivors. "How does it feel?" Sarah whispered as the last defendant was led away in shackles. "Like justice," Marcus replied simply, "but also like the beginning of something bigger." He was right. The rescue had been only the first step in what had become a much larger mission. Marcus had retired from the military to establish the Stone Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to combating human trafficking and supporting survivors. Sarah had delayed her return to college to serve as the foundation's first victim advocate, using her experience to help other survivors navigate the complex process of recovery and legal proceedings. The safe house had been converted into the foundation's first residential facility, providing long-term housing and support for trafficking survivors. Katya had become the facility director, her natural leadership skills and personal experience making her uniquely qualified to help others heal. Miguel, now 16 and attending high school, served as a peer counselor for younger victims. Dr. Peterson had joined the foundation full-time, developing treatment protocols specifically designed for trafficking survivors. Her work was already being adopted by medical centers across the country, improving care for victims who had previously fallen through the cracks of traditional healthcare systems. Mr. Stone, a reporter approached as they left the courtroom. Can you comment on the Foundation's next plans? Marcus paused, considering his words carefully. Media attention had been both helpful and challenging throughout the investigation and trials. Public awareness was crucial for preventing future crimes, but sensationalized coverage could re-traumatize survivors. The Stone Foundation will continue expanding our services, Marcus replied. We're opening 3 new residential facilities this year and launching a national hotline for families of missing persons. But our most important work is changing how society thinks about trafficking victims. These are not statistics or case numbers. They're human beings who deserve our support and respect. Sarah stepped forward, adding her own perspective. Every survivor's journey is different, but no one should have to face recovery alone. The Foundation ensures that doesn't happen. As they walked away from the courthouse, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that rainy night in the warehouse. Sarah's transformation had been remarkable to witness. The trauma would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her. Instead, she had chosen to transform her pain into purpose, becoming a powerful advocate for other survivors. Dad, there's something I want to show you, Sarah said as they drove back to the Foundation's headquarters. She directed him to a small park near the city center, where a memorial had been erected for trafficking victims who didn't survive to see justice. The simple granite monument bore the names of 37 people whose cases had been connected to the network they had helped dismantle. I come here sometimes, Sarah explained, placing her hand on the stone, to remember why we do this work. These people didn't get the chance we had. Marcus felt a familiar mix of sadness and determination. The memorial represented both the failures of the system and the motivation to do better. Each name carved in stone was someone's child, sibling, or parent who had been failed by society's inability to protect the vulnerable. Agent Morrison called this morning, Marcus said, sharing news he had been saving for the right moment. 3 more networks have been identified using intelligence from our case. International task forces are being formed to target them. Sarah's eyes lit up with fierce satisfaction. Good. The more they catch, the fewer people have to go through what we did. They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching other visitors leave flowers and notes at the memorial. Marcus noticed that many of the messages were from other survivors, people who had found strength in the stories of those who hadn't survived to tell their own. Sarah, I need to ask you something, Marcus said eventually. Do you ever regret not going back to your old life? Finishing college the way you planned? Having a normal career? Sarah considered the question seriously before answering. I think about it sometimes, but this feels like what I'm supposed to be doing. Maybe I needed to go through that horrible experience to understand how to help others through theirs. Marcus nodded, understanding completely. His own military career had been defined by protecting others, and the Foundation felt like the natural evolution of that calling. Sarah had inherited not just his determination, but also his sense of duty to those who couldn't protect themselves. Besides, Sarah added with a smile that reminded Marcus so much of her mother, I am getting an education, just not the one I originally planned. She was right. The Foundation had brought together experts in law enforcement, psychology, social work, and victim advocacy. Sarah was learning from some of the best minds in the field, while simultaneously contributing her unique perspective as a survivor. As they prepared to leave the memorial, a young woman approached them hesitantly. She was perhaps 19 or 20, with the cautious demeanor that Marcus had learned to recognize in trafficking survivors. Excuse me, the woman said softly. Are you Sarah Stone? From the Foundation? Yes, Sarah replied gently, immediately giving the woman her full attention. I was rescued 2 months ago. My caseworker said you might be able to help me. I don't know how to start over. Sarah's response was immediate and warm. You already have started over. The hardest part is behind you. Would you like to come have coffee with me? I'd like to hear your story if you're ready to share it. Marcus watched as his daughter began the process she had repeated dozens of times over the past 6 months, providing hope and guidance to someone who desperately needed both. Each interaction reminded him of why their work was so important, and why Sarah had chosen this path despite its challenges. As they walked toward the Foundation building with the new survivor between them, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. The general who had searched desperately for his missing daughter had found something more than he had been looking for. He had found a new mission, a new family of survivors and advocates, and a way to transform the worst experience of their lives into something that could prevent others from suffering the same fate. The purple bruises that had once marked Sarah's captivity had faded completely, but the strength they represented would last forever. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a beacon of hope for others still finding their way out of darkness. The war against human trafficking would continue, but today, in this moment, Marcus Stone could say with certainty that they were winning. One survivor at a time, one family at a time, one life at a time. They were making the world safer for the vulnerable and voiceless. And that, Marcus thought as he watched his daughter embrace their work with passionate determination, was the most important victory of all.